All right, so you wanted us to take a deep dive into some of those new Texas laws, huh? The ones changing how law enforcement operates, right?
You bet.
Well, buckle up because we're going straight to the source. The Texas Code of Criminal Procedure.
Yeah.
No watered down summaries here. We're talking racial profiling, body cams, use of force, the whole shebang.
It's pretty fascinating stuff, really. I think you'll be surprised by some of the details.
I'm ready to be surprised.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right in, shall we? Racial profiling. It's a huge issue, obviously,
Right.
and it seems like Texas is trying some pretty interesting things to tackle it, right?
Yeah, they're taking this multi-pronged approach. It starts with, having a really clear definition of what racial profiling actually is.
Makes sense, yeah.
It's now, like, explicitly stated in the law that police actions have got to be based on, actual behavior, not just someone's race or ethnicity.
All right.
Seems obvious, but that clarity is really important to set the stage for everything else.
Totally. Okay, so that's the definition.
Yeah.
But how do they make sure officers are actually following it?
So get this. Every single law enforcement agency in Texas,
Uh-huh.
they're now required to have a written policy on this. And it's not just a quick little memo. It's got to be detailed, like really detailed.
Oh, wow.
And it's got to cover way more than just don't racially profile. It'd have to include procedures for public education, like making sure people know their rights, and a clear complaint process for if something does happen.
So it's about, like, actually making it easy for people to report it if they experience it.
Exactly. Accessibility and transparency. Oh, and this is a good one. They have to include contact info for filing complaints on every single ticket or citation.
Wait, seriously? Like right there on the ticket?
Yeah. So imagine getting pulled over, and right there on the ticket, it tells you how to report profiling. It's like,
Oh.
we're serious about this, folks.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Right. And there's more comprehensive data collection on every stop. We're talking race, ethnicity searches, use of force, everything gets documented.
Wow. Okay, so they're gathering all this data, but what are they actually doing with it? Is it just sitting in a file somewhere?
Oh, no, not at all. They're using it to identify potential problems. So all this data, it gets compiled into these annual reports, stripped of identifying info to protect privacy, of course.
Sure.
But the reports, they allow for analysis of trends. So you can see if there are disparities, like if certain groups are being treated differently.
That's actually a really smart approach. Data can tell a powerful story, but data alone doesn't change anything. What's stopping departments from just, like, ignoring all of this?
Well, there are some pretty serious consequences for not complying. Local agencies, if they don't submit the data, fines up to $5,000 per violation, payable to the state.
Oof, that's a hefty fine.
And state agencies, the executive director gets $1,000 out of their own agency budget.
Wow, so they're putting their money where their mouth is? But okay, say disparities are found. Does that automatically prove racial profiling?
That's an important point. The data itself, it doesn't automatically prove anything. It's more like a starting point. It highlights potential issues that need a deeper look.
Ah, so it's more like a red flag system.
Exactly. If something looks off in the data, then they investigate further. It's about promoting transparency and accountability and building trust.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about racial profiling, but let's move on to another hot topic, body cameras.
Another area where Texas is making some big changes. Big changes.
For sure. So fill us in. What's the deal with body cams in Texas now?
Well, they've recognized that body cams, they can play a big role in accountability, right? So they've set up this grant program to help agencies get those programs up and running.
Oh, interesting.
And the grants they could even cover data storage. Think about how much footage that is.
Data storage is no joke these days.
Nope, not at all. It's a huge expense. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, for sure. But are they just, like, handing out free money?
Not quite. The agencies getting those grants, they got to chip in a 25% match.
Okay, so they're sharing the cost. Shows they're invested in making this work, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about the cameras themselves. Texas law, it gets very specific about what has to be in an agency's body cam policy.
Oh, okay, so, like, what kind of things are we talking about?
Things like when those cameras have to be turned on, data retention policies, minimum 90 days. By the way, storage procedures, security, public access, even whether officers can look at the footage before they give statements.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
Right, they're trying to cover all the bases.
But what about, those situations where an officer might not want the camera on? Are they required to record, like, their whole shift?
That's a good question. The law actually tries to balance transparency with privacy. So no, they don't have to record everything. But during an active investigation, the camera's got to be on, unless it's deactivated according to that policy.
So not constant surveillance, but making sure those important moments are documented. Okay, makes sense. What about the people actually using those cameras? Any training involved there?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone, the officers wearing them and the people handling the data, they all got to go through these specific training programs.
So they're trying to ensure that, the tech is being used the right way and the data is being managed responsibly.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we've talked racial profiling and body cameras, but I'm sure there's a lot more to unpack with these new Texas laws, right?
Oh, yeah.
What else is on the agenda for our deep dive today?
Well, how about we tackle use of force next? That's where things get really interesting, I think.
Oh, that's a big one. All right, I'm ready. Let's hear it.
All right, so use of force. This is where I think some of the biggest changes come in with these new Texas laws.
Okay. Yeah, you said things get interesting, so lay it on me. What are we talking about here?
Well, one of the biggest ones is this duty to intervene law. It's a pretty big deal, like a game changer, really, when it comes to holding officers accountable.
Duty to intervene. Okay, I'm intrigued. But break that down for me. What exactly does that mean?
So basically, the law now says that officers, they have to intervene, like it's mandatory. If they see another officer using excessive force, they got to step in.
Wait, so it's not enough to just report it later? They've got to actually do something right then and there.
Exactly. And not only do they have to, try to stop it, but they also got to report it to their supervisor immediately. No delaying.
Man, that really changes things, doesn't it? It makes officers responsible for each other's actions in a whole new way.
It really does. It's about creating this culture of accountability.
Yeah.
Where officers are empowered to kind of police each other and prevent stuff from happening in the first place.
Yeah. I can see how that could be super powerful. But what about, let's be real. What if an officer's afraid to speak up? Worried about retaliation or something?
Totally. That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
But Texas law, it does have those whistleblower protections in place, specifically to protect officers who report misconduct.
Okay, so there are legal safeguards there, but changing a whole culture, that's tough. Do you think this law will really make a difference out on the streets?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely like a step in the right direction. It sends a strong message for sure. Excessive force won't be tolerated. But ultimately, it all comes down to how it's implemented and enforced, within each department.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what else has changed with the use of force laws?
Another big one is the ban on neck restraints.
Oh, right, like chokeholds and stuff.
Exactly. Except for, very specific life or death situations. Chokeholds and similar restraints banned.
Wow. We've all seen how dangerous those can be.
Yep. And this ban really reflects that growing national concern. It's about, finding safer ways to handle those situations, prioritizing safety.
Definitely sends a message. Okay, but you said there are some exceptions, right? Like when would a neck restraint actually be allowed?
So the law, it defines those life or death situations as basically when an officer believes, and it has to be reasonable, that their life or someone else's is in, immediate danger. Serious danger.
Okay, so it's a very, very high bar to clear.
Oh, absolutely. It's only for the most extreme situations.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about racial profiling, we've talked about body cameras, we've talked about duty to intervene, and this ban on neck restraints. Anything else happening with these new laws?
Well, with all the tech advancements these days, it's not surprising that Texas is also looking at use of force when it comes to drones.
Drones. Whoa, okay. Things are getting futuristic now. What kind of force are we even talking about here? Are we talking drones with weapons?
No. Not quite yet, at least. We're not at weaponized drones patrolling the skies. But even unarmed drones can be risky, right? If they're not used properly. Think about it. A drone chasing a suspect, accidentally causing harm, it could happen.
Oh, yeah, okay. I see your point. So how are they regulating that, the use of force with drones?
Any agency that uses drones for law enforcement stuff,
Yeah.
they have to have a written policy now on use of force. And it's got to be super specific, can't be vague, clear guidelines for when and how force can be used with those drones.
So they're trying to be proactive, huh? Anticipate problems before they happen.
Exactly. And to make sure they're being accountable, those policies have to be sent to the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement every 2 years for review.
Okay, so there's oversight there. But even with policies, aren't there still, ethical questions about using force with drones?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lots of ethical considerations. Some people argue that using drones, even without weapons, could lead to way more surveillance. people feeling constantly watched.
Yeah, I can see that. It's kind of creepy, right? Like Big Brother watching your every move.
Right. It's complicated for sure. As technology keeps advancing, we need to keep talking about those ethical implications. It's important.
It's a good point. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Racial profiling, body cameras, use of force, drones. What else you got for me?
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the duty to render aid. This is a really interesting addition to the law. It shows a focus on like human dignity and compassion. I like it.
Okay, I'm all for compassion. Tell me more about this duty to render aid.
So basically, it requires officers to give first aid to anyone they encounter on duty who's injured, regardless of whether they're a suspect or a victim.
So if an officer sees someone hurt, they have to help. I mean, that seems pretty basic, right?
You'd think so, right?
Okay.
But it hasn't always been like specifically stated in the law. This new thing, it clears up any confusion. Officers have a duty to help whenever they can.
So it's like codifying that ethical obligation, making it official.
Yep. But of course, there's a caveat. That duty to render aid, it only applies if it doesn't put the officer or anyone else in danger.
Okay, that makes sense. So it prioritizes safety, but still emphasizes the importance of helping. It's a balance.
Exactly. And keep in mind, officers aren't expected to be doctors or anything. They're required to call EMS right away and just provide basic first aid until the medics get there.
Right, just doing what they can,
Yeah.
stopping bleeding, providing comfort, things like that. It's really about humanizing that role of law enforcement.
I totally agree. It shows that they're there to protect and serve everyone.
So, big picture time. We've talked about a lot. Racial profiling, body cams, use of force, and now this duty to render aid. Texas is really shaking things up. What's your overall take on all of this?
Well, it's definitely bold. Texas is trying to address some serious issues in law enforcement, trying to create a system that's more accountable, more transparent, and one that focuses on building trust with the community.
Okay, but I'm hearing a but coming.
But, as with any big change, the real test is in the doing. Laws are only as good as their enforcement, and it remains to be seen how all of this will actually play out on the streets, in real-life situations.
That's true. It's one thing to write it down, but it's another to see it in action.
Exactly. And it's not just about the officers themselves. It's about creating a culture of accountability, one that goes all the way up to the top.
It's like a whole shift in mindset, right?
Eh,
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have more to unpack.
Yeah, you're right. We do. And I think it would be good to go back to something we talked about earlier, that data on racial profiling. It's meant to help identify potential problems, but what happens if they find something?
Well, it's really important to remember the data alone doesn't prove anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't automatically mean bias or misconduct. It's just a starting point.
Okay, so say the data shows a pattern of, I don't know, maybe black drivers getting pulled over more often in a certain area for minor violations. What happens then? Well, that would definitely raise a red flag. And then the department, they'd have to investigate further. They'd look at the officers involved, their training, any complaints against them, that sort of thing.
So it's kind of like detective work, right? Trying to see if there's something really going on there.
Exactly. And if they find evidence of bias or, that officers are doing something wrong, then they can take action. Disciplinary action, maybe more training, or even change departmental policies.
So it's like this whole cycle, right? Collect data, look for trends, investigate, take action, and then repeat.
That's the idea. It's about using data to constantly improve things
Mm-hmm.
and build trust too.
Makes sense. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Back to body cameras. I'm curious about how the footage gets used. You mentioned that officers can look at it before giving statements. Why is that?
There are a couple reasons, actually. One is just to make sure things are accurate. Memories can be fuzzy, especially in those high-stress situations. So the footage helps them remember what happened more clearly.
Oh, so it's like a memory aid.
Yeah, kind of. And then the other reason is to make sure things are fair. What if there are different stories about what happened? The footage can show, objectively what really went down.
It levels the playing field, makes sure everyone's treated fairly.
Exactly. But it's also important to remember, the footage, it's just one piece of the puzzle. Investigators still have to look at everything, witness statements, other evidence.
Right, right. So it's not about replacing those old ways of investigating. It's just adding another layer.
Exactly. And of course, like we talked about before, there are all those rules about who can see the footage, when it can be released, Got to protect people's privacy, you know?
Right, right. You know, one thing that stood out to me about these Texas laws is how much they emphasize personal responsibility.
Yeah.
We talked about the duty to intervene, how
Mhm.
officers got to step in if they see something wrong.
Yeah, that's huge. It's not okay to just stand by anymore. Officers have to do something.
And then on top of that, they have to report it. It's like checks and balances within the system itself.
Totally. And it's not just about use of force either. That duty to render aid thing, that shows personal responsibility too.
Oh, yeah, good point. It doesn't matter if someone's a suspect or not. Officers have to help if they're hurt. It's like acknowledging everyone's humanity.
Exactly. It's about more than just enforcing laws. It's about protecting everyone.
So, if we take a step back and look at all these changes, it seems like Texas is trying to change the whole approach to law enforcement, make it more well-rounded, more humane.
I think that's a really good way to put it. These laws are a big step toward accountability, transparency, building trust.
But, like we said before, laws are just words on paper until they're actually put into practice. What do you think is going to be most important in making sure these changes actually make a difference?
That's a good question. I think a few things. First, the police departments themselves, they have to be committed to this. It can't just be talk. It has to be a real change in how they do things.
So, buy-in from the top is crucial.
Absolutely. And just as important, they got to work with the community. These laws came from people's concerns, so the community needs to be a part of making sure they work.
It's a two-way street then, huh?
Yeah. And then we all need to keep talking about this stuff. What's working, what's not working, how to keep making things better. It's a conversation that needs to keep going.
It's an ongoing process for sure. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to, learn and adapt.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
There's no magic solution to these issues. But I really do think these new laws in Texas, they're a good start. They lay the groundwork for a fair system for everyone.
Well, I think we've covered a ton today. From racial profiling to body cameras, use of force, duty to render aid, we've really gotten into the weeds on these new Texas laws.
It's been great. I hope everyone listening found it useful.
I know I did. And I think the big takeaway here is that Texas is making some bold moves to fix some of the most important problems in law enforcement. It's a big step toward a system that's more accountable and transparent, a system that's fair for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. And while we don't know exactly what the impact will be yet, it's definitely something worth paying attention to.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for positive change.